Part 2, Measuring Your Social Value. So in the previous section, we asked the question, what do you want to use your social value for? And there were a number of options that we explored. So now we're going to look in terms of how do you measure that social value, the content of that information that you then use to share with your key stakeholders, your partners and potential clients. So in this section, we'll look at two models. The Social Value International model, which uses a social return on investment model. And that's really focused on the impact of your social value. What does your impact actually mean? And what have you achieved for your service users? And essentially, social return on investment, so SROI, usually would tell us what real difference did you actually make, or did your organization make? What was that impact? And it doesn't necessarily look at the value or the economic side of things. It's really about its impact focus. And it's usually used by SMEs to turn your impact into evidence, which hopefully will then win trust, funding, and other opportunities based on what you actually want to use it for. There is also another model which is equally recognized, but it's focused more on the economic side of things. So the TOMS model, which stands for Themes, Outcomes and Measures, is an economic proxy model. And what essentially that does is tells commissioners how much policy aligned social value did you deliver. So it's a quantifiable figure that's attributed to your social value. And commissioners, especially within the public sector, will be looking for you to use that model in order to quantify your social value. So typically, TOMS is used by local authorities, housing associations, NHS, and generally within public sector tenders. And over the course of this section, we will have examples of both models so that you can calculate what your social value is using both models and use them appropriately when you wish to communicate to your key stakeholders. So first up, we'll use and look into the SROI model, so the social return on investment model. So using this model, measuring your social value using SROI shows the real difference your business makes to people, communities, and environment. And so on the next slides, we will look at using examples of how you will calculate it using this model. So before we proceed to the example, I just wanted to make you aware of some terminology that will be used in order to calculate your social return on investment. So in order to get to a figure of your social impacts using this model, some adjustments are required to be made so that you are accurately reporting your social impact. And so you'll hear these terms, so I'm making you aware so that you know what they are. So when we are doing a calculation, you have an understanding of them. So key terms would be, and under the adjustments, so we've got a term called deadweight. And this essentially means the proportion of outcomes that would have happened anyway without your project, without your intervention. And so there's a typical range of a weighting that you apply to that. So that's usually 10 to 40%. And these are industry standards. So this is governed by the SROI. So it's key to note that generally you would apply a lower ratio or a lower weighting for innovative programs, and then a higher weighting for more mature interventions where some benefits happen naturally. Another adjustment type is displacement. And essentially what that means is the extent to which your project's outcomes reduce benefits elsewhere. And a typical range that you would apply to that is between 0% and 20%. So 10% would be a good ratio for that one. And so it's good to note for this adjustment type, it's often low in community or social projects, but high in competitive context, e.e. employment programs. Another adjustment type is the attribution. and which essentially means the proportion of outcomes caused by other organizations or external factors. So how much of that could be attributed to your initiative rather than it would have by external activities that would be happening at the same time or would be happening. And a typical range that you would apply to that in terms of reduction of or applying to your initiative would be between 20 to 50%. And this typically would depend on a number of partners or external influences contributing to the outcome. So if you are working with other partners and so your contribution is part of that wider piece of work, then you would apply a higher range or ratio or weighting, sorry, to that attribution adjustment type. And then finally, we've got drop off. And essentially what this is the rate at which outcomes decline over time, over a period of time. So it could be that, you've got a year-long program, 18-month program, but actually the outcomes reduce over that period of time. So typical range or weighting for that would be between 10 and 50% per year. And this is typically applied for multi-year benefits, e.g. training programs or behavioural change. So hopefully that provides the context. So when we go into the actual calculation, it will make more sense for you. So using the SROI model, let's explore this example calculation. So an example given is a business offers free digital skills training for unemployed adults. The organisation delivered 20 participants, the organisation delivered, of which 20 participants trained, 15 completed the course, 10 gained employment within a 6-month period. So SVI would focus on the change experienced by people, not activity delivered. So what we would then do is identify step 1, so broken down into 5 steps. Step 1, identify stakeholders. So we know they're unemployed adults and they're attending training. So that's the activity that they're doing. Step 2, identify outcomes. What changed? So increased confidence, improved employability, gained paid employment. Step 3, the evidence to change. So before, after confidence surveys, job outcomes, tracking or testimonials. Step 4, established quantity. So we know that 10 people gained employment. So even though it started with 20, there was a drop-off rate. And so out of that, 10 people gained employment. And then step 5 is where you apply the impact adjustments. And so on the next slide, we will calculate what this looks like step by step. Right, so to continue on that example, we're going to apply 2 adjustments to the calculation for this specific activity. So we're going to apply a dead weight of 20%. So what we're saying is that some may have gotten jobs anyway. And then also attribution of 30%. So an agency, maybe like the job centre or other employment agencies, support also help to create that job for that individual. So we talked about initially you had 20 people that we trained, but actually only 10 went on to gain employment. So how we calculate this and how we apply the typical value is we look at calculating it from a single person. So one single person equals essentially one value. So if we're saying that 20% of that one value is attributed to dead weight, we've removed 20% from that. So that will leave you with 0.8. So for every individual that's gone through that, the dead weight of gaining employment is essentially 0.8. And then similarly, we use the same methodology for the attribution. So we're saying that 30%, so essentially that's 3 out of 10. So again, with that single calculation that we're looking to do, we will apply that 30%, so that will then reduce it to 0.7. So therefore, you should have 0.8 times 0.7. So the dead weight being 0.8 and the attribution being 0.7. And when you calculate that, that's 5.6 people generally affected. So out of that 10 people, once you've removed all the adjustments and you've done all the calculations, it is believed from this example that 5.6 people have generally been affected and impacted. So what we then do is look at the value of the outcome. So step 6 is looking at that financial value of the outcome. So we're using a well-being kind of valuation UK proxy for moving from unemployed into employment. So this is where, again, you do need to do some research in terms of what is the industry standard for that transition for that individual. So do a bit of research to understand actually what is that economic value of transitioning someone from unemployment to employment. And then essentially what you then do is times that number. So the number of people impacted, so in this case is or affected, so in this case is 5.6. And then you will times that by that figure. So as an example, let's use 11,000, but it would essentially be whatever figure that you decide is that well-being in unemployment into employment figure. And then you times that. So for the context of this example, your social value contributions or calculation is looking around 61,000 or just over 61,500. So you can use that same methodology. It does require some research in terms of specifically when you're looking at that well-being valuation, what is industry standards. But it's also equal to know that this is a social impact value. This isn't what you physically value that you physically created in monetary terms. It is a social impact value. But when you report it as social impact and not, financial contribution. Measuring your social value, frequently asked questions. Question 1, why do we focus on outcomes instead of the number of people trained? Because social value measures the change experienced by people, not just the activity delivered. So it is about the impact, it is about the effect that is had on the individual, so that you're able to really determine the material change and the causality of that change. Question 2, what if not everyone achieves the same outcomes? That's normal. Impact calculations focus on the people who experience a clear evidence change, not total participation. And with everything, there will always be, you could start off with, let's use 10 as the number, but you can start off with that figure and there will be so many different variables that by the time you've completed something, then there might be only 2, 3, 4, or 5 people still remaining on that course. That's totally fine. You always consider that there will be some form of drop-off. And as we used in a previous example where we started with 20 individuals, we saw that drop off from 20 to 10, and then even that there was you still had to apply adjustments to be able to quantify what that value would be. Do we have to apply impact adjustments even if the outcomes feel obvious? Yes, adjustments ensure your impact is realistic, credible, and trusted by funders and commissioners. No funder or commissioner or would look at an impact and expect it to be 100%. That's quite unrealistic. And so what you want to do is make sure you can be as accurate with your reporting as possible and transparent. And where possible, if you're asked to audit it, to be audited, that you have that evidence to back that up. So a rule of thumb from my perspective is, be conservative. Obviously demonstrate and certainly calculate it with as much evidence as you can gather. But where practical, I would say always err on the side of caution and do not overclaim, which is one of the social value principles of measuring social value. What does displacement mean and why do we apply it? Displacement accounts for outcomes that may have happened anyway or replace another outcome, ensuring we only, or yourself only claims the additional impact you truly created. So you're not overclaiming on other things that you probably wouldn't have impacted, or they may have happened anyway. So again, it's about that transparency and only claiming what you have materially impacted. How do we decide what percentage to use for adjustments? Percentages are based on reasonable assumptions, sector benchmarks, and local context, and should be clearly explained rather than treated as exact science. So again, this is something that I think whoever's running the program, that you would consider all of that before you start your calculations and you come to an end figure, that you are being as realistic as possible. So if, for instance, we use this example of 10 again, of 10 people that you have gone through some form of employment training or skills training, you know, who were the other partners? Would they have got a job anyway? They just needed the opportunity. And so just be as transparent and be as realistic as possible and be as honest as possible as well. What if we're unsure about the adjustments? Can we still calculate impact? Yes, it's better to apply cautious, transparent estimates than to ignore adjustments, as credibility matters more than precision. So claim, this is all about you demonstrating that you are delivering social impact and you're doing activities which contributes to that. And as mentioned in the previous question, it isn't exact science, but you still, it's still good practice to calculate your impact, but be conservative with your adjustments, and apply the ones that are relevant to you and that you believe are relevant to you. But also in one of the earlier slides, we talked about who should be part of this wider conversation around measuring social value and understanding your social value and developing your social value statement, and all of those things actually involve key internals and external stakeholders to get an idea of what may be industry practice, what they may have used previously for similar activities. So ask your peers, ask your colleagues, ask the industry. And so you can probably then start getting accurate figures around what should be adjusted and what adjustments should be used and what kind of weighting you can apply to those adjustments as well for that activity. And it would be good practice. So then what you start to then have is create maybe some form of glossary or some form of file, which you can start to get into the rhythm of what type of weighting you apply to certain types of activity. And so you don't necessarily have to keep on going back to final doing research. You already have that in the realm of your um, not portfolio, but you already have that to hand so that you can use when you're calculating other social values. So that concludes this section. Up next, we will continue with measuring your social value using the TOMS model. So enjoy, and I'll see you on the next slide.